Yes, absolutely. Well, in Pakistan, there are several examples. Healthcare, for instance, can often be, I mean, certainly not the kind of standards that you have here in the first world. And there was a young girl, a 3-year-old girl, who died as a result of an irresponsibility on the part of the healthcare system. And her parents, you know, which so many kids like this so many cases happen, but her parents started this whole campaign with billboards and mobile texts and, you know, blogging and so on, and got so much sympathy for this girl, Imane, who died, that they actually managed to do something. So, you know, I think that it is possible to have results.
We have a Twitter question.
Yeah.
You posted that.
Yeah, secretly. Is it coming up? Otherwise, you have to read it. Go ahead, your Twitter. Mr. Twitter. Okay. As the impacts of climate change increase manifold, we don't see the required urgency to address the issue. There is a big section of media which still doesn't recognize the severity of the problem. What is the reason of its laxity and how it can be addressed? Who wants to answer this one? Anyone?
Yeah. James wants to answer.
James, you want to answer? Go ahead.
Well, I think it is a problem. It often depends on the editorial policy of a particular media organization, but the problem, as has been identified here at the conference, is that sometimes there's a false balance that's put forward, where the media organization, the editor perhaps, not necessarily the journalist, feels that they have to counterbalance the views of expert scientists with naysayers who may not have the same expertise in the issue, and the ultimate impact of that is that the urgency gets watered down. So then the public gets confused, and there's a sense in the public that there's still disagreement about whether climate change is actually happening or how severe it will be, where in fact there is a pretty strong scientific consensus that it is happening and that the impacts are going to be.
But what do you think, for example, I don't want to make a parallelism with the financial sector, but very few journalists asked the tough question at the time on what was going on, most probably because nobody knew those questions. Do we have enough well-prepared traditional or other type of contributors in this debate that can ask the tough question and then understand the answer and present it in a way that people will understand?
No, unfortunately, I think we do need both more journalists who make this their area of expertise, and also we need all journalists to become somewhat familiar with the issues, because whether you're a political journalist or a business journalist or a science journalist, or even if you're in health or personal finance, whatever your beat is, you're going to run into this issue of climate change, and you need to become at least a little bit familiar with it. And if I can toot our own horn, that's the things we're trying to do. We have an online course on climate change that we developed, Internews did along with the Poynter Institute, so that any journalist who wants to learn about climate change, whatever your beat is, you can go online and take a 3-hour course for free to understand.
Oh, we have conference like that address. Actually, this session was more about the tool. Please.
Allow me to chip in here, please. I'm with Greenpeace, and I'd like to challenge in the sense of the quality of media, traditional media. I think there's probably different views on whether CNN is a qualitative medium or not, but we've experienced very interestingly when we brought journalists from CNN into Indonesia to show the impacts of deforestation, whereas at the same time, one of the most destructive Indonesian companies on palm oil was advertising big time, doing a global deal with CNN. And it created huge issues inside of that. And that goes back to, if you make the parallels to financial sector, that's a profit-making company at the end of the day. I'd love to hear some views on that.
Who wants to answer? James, again, I'll have him first and then you. Go ahead.
But I just wanted to address what you said, that our tradition on how we cover stuff.
So you're not answering the lady question?
No,
that's not polite. First, okay. Answer to the lady question, please. Go ahead, then I'll give you the floor.
So, yeah, I mean, this is the problem with media. And I was a journalist for a decade based in Thailand, and I can tell you firsthand that the media did a very poor job of covering issues like climate change, especially those issues that affect the rural poor, people in the countryside. And why is that? Where does the media get its money from? It gets money from advertisers. And those advertisers, what sector do they target? They want to target the middle class, the urban sector, the business sector. And so, inevitably, the media's coverage is skewed towards that sector. And it was often left to the environmental journalists, and there are many dedicated ones out there. It's left to, but they're definitely a minority. It's left to them to cover basically all these issues in the countryside that are affecting the poor and the most vulnerable, who, I think as Victoria was mentioning, these are, it's ironically the most vulnerable people who have the least information about climate change and the impacts that they're going to be facing.
Robert.
Your question really speaks to me. I spent about 4 years working with the Orangutan Foundation in Borneo, covering the very issue of deforestation there. And I was able to document wide-scale illegal logging, alluvial gold mining, fish and prawn farming, virtually all of the factors leading to deforestation. And it was out of frustration of not being able to break that story or sort of get it out to a larger audience that I turned to the sort of social networks and the more sort of...
Can I ask you a reverse question? You, Greenpeace, how do you work with Shell?
Whether we work or how we work with Shell.
I know you do, but when you work with Shell, how do you work with Shell? Because I think that the corporate social responsibility question is the same for all companies, as much as media company when you go into CNN, which is a commercial venture. Then if we want to go back and talk about the public service and how should we finance public service, is the debate that we were trying to have here, that we had this mash-up of content. Maybe we need public-funded television. So my point is there any experience that you have when you work with corporations which may have their own interests? How do you keep balance there? And how can you do the same with a CNN getting advertising?
I'm going to say, to answer that, if you stay in this room and come here at 4 p.m. when I'm going to be at a panel.
We'll follow you.
No, but I'm at a panel which is about CSR and greenwashing, so I'll go into that specifically. We will, if it's a means to an end.
I think it's an interesting parallelism. Maybe media company could learn from that kind of interaction and repeat the same, because they do need a revenue stream.
No, we have good examples where we do work with corporations. Unilever, Coca-Cola, we've done work like that. But we will always challenge them if they don't go full Monty.
Please, I catch you.
But it's okay. But the problem is that we know too little as mainstream media. We don't have experts. So that's why we turn back on what we normally do. We just hold the mic and say, what do you think? And then we have to balance it. And then I'm coming from a country where Björn Lomborg lives. So each time there's a story about climate change, someone say, but what does Björn Lomborg say? And then we have, you can say we have balanced it. We don't know anything ourselves, but we have balanced it. And what we do we do our job basically, which is to raise the knowledge level of people, being navigation system for people. No, we're not. We're just confusing them, and that's what's happening. Because we're balancing. But the problem is there are also people on the pro-climate change side which are not telling the whole truth. We must be clear about that. That's also propaganda, and it's sometimes also religion for them. But we don't know enough ourselves in order to say what is true and what is right here. So we just balance it. But if 95% of experts say there's a climate change going on, why did we have to balance the 95% with the 1% always? And then we have 3% who don't know anything.
I have another question up there. Oh, I love this panel. All ladies asking questions. The men are shy. Amazing.